We're actually going to talk about some election results from France. We have some first round results in. So, the way the French races go, they have 12 candidates running here on the first round. The top two will advance to the sort of final round. That vote will be 2 weeks from today on Sunday, April 24th. If one candidate crosses 50% in the first round, they lock down the win. That was not going to happen. It obviously has not happened. But we do have, I think, a really fascinating race here taking shape. It looks like it is going to come down to a runoff between incumbent Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen. So there were basically three top tier candidates running. There was Macron, the sort of center left, as they call him, incumbent; Le Pen, the National Front Party, the far right party; and then Jean-Luc Mélenchon, sort of the Bernie type, a former socialist, who's now running as a left candidate as well. He surged in the polls late. It would have been great if he finished second and went up against Macron in 2 weeks. It looks like he is going to fall just short of that. Updated results here that I'm reading on The Guardian have Macron in the lead at 27.4%, Le Pen in second place at 24.2%, Mélenchon in third at 21.4%. That is with approximately 85% of the vote in, so it looks like those are going to be about the final numbers, more or less. And I think it's a really, really interesting race. I was listening to a podcast earlier today because I knew we were going to cover this evening, and the way they talk about Macron in France, we always had the instinct that he was like the French Obama. That's what a lot of people always called him, right? But when you hear about, because I was hearing these French commentators sort of describe his, rise to power.
He always struck me as the French Tony Blair.
Well, I mean, he's
like he's their version of a neoliberal.
Yeah, but he's got the charisma, he's got some swag, he did run on, sort of like vague promises of people-centered reform, just like Obama did. He ran as an anti-establishment candidate. He didn't really have any major party backing going into his race 5 years ago. And he won as sort of this guy who was going to go in there and, kind of maybe shake things up and produce some kind of, hope and change, just like Obama. Like, nobody really knew exactly what they were getting into, but he looked good. He sounded good. It was something different. Let's try it. And now he's in the same spot that Obama was in 2012, where he has to run now as the face of the political class. The difference is he has to now run for re-election against this sort of ascendant populist right, whereas Obama got to run against fucking Mitt Romney. Obama lucked out, and the GOP fielded basically,
Richie Rich.
Right, exactly. Whereas, Macron now is going to be tested against a populist, right-wing movement in France. And what I was listening and what I've been reading is the same thing we heard going into the Brexit vote, same thing we heard going into the 2016 vote. Yeah, the Remains will probably win, but there's some bad signs here that we have to be careful of. And the more I look at it,
before we went on
tough,
at the polling of French people, and it's not too surprising because they are not very pro-immigration, actually.
No.
The Ipsos Institute did a poll for Le Monde, the biggest newspaper in France, I believe. The majority of French people, 65%, say there are too many foreigners in France. That is polled as high as 70% at times. 60% agree with the statement. Today, I no longer feel at home like I did before. 61% share the belief that immigrants in France do not make an effort to integrate. 46% actually believe it's not difficult for an immigrant to integrate. And this really surprised me. So 95% of National Front voters, which is a far right party, believe there are too many foreigners in France. That's not the surprising part. 46% of socialists believe there are too many foreigners in France. 60% of people believe that Islam is incompatible with the values of the French Republic. And 78% believe that Islam seeks to impose its way of life on others. So when you look at all that, it's not, I mean, the writing's there on the wall. It's not very surprising that Le Pen is performing this way, and she might win.
Yeah, I
It
mean,
definitely has that Trump Brexit vibe about it.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, look, so there are a few signs that look bad for Macron. Number one, obviously, you don't expect with 12 people in the race that anybody's going to cross that 50% threshold on the first round. You would expect an incumbent to fare a little better on the first round than 27%. Like, you're an incumbent, you want to be in that 33 to 37% range on the first round, in order to feel really good going into the final. The interesting thing here is you have here, I'll bring this up, I'll share my screen so that I'm not just describing stuff that people can't see. Here we go. So this is from The Guardian. These are the results. These are updating live every minute. You have Macron, Le Pen, Mélenchon, and then this guy here is Zemmour, who is at 7%. It's funny how they describe him, a far-right columnist who has convictions for inciting racial hatred. So this guy's apparently, a real fucking, whack job. This is like, the Seinfeld episode, the limo, where George gets mistaken for O'Brien, the neo-Nazi. They take a limo from the airport and they give them a fake name, and the limo is there to pick up O'Brien. So George says, yeah, I'll be O'Brien. O'Brien turns out to be this leader of like a neo-Nazi group who's giving a speech that night. So that's who he is, basically. He's the O'Brien in the race. So he's at 7%. So you could pretty much put all his votes in Le Pen's basket there for the final round. The interesting thing here is going to be, you talk about Brexit vibes and 2016 vibes, I think the deciding factor here is going to be, does Macron get enough of the Mélenchon support? Because Mélenchon is like the Bernie in the race, basically, and he seems like a very good candidate. It's really a shame that he just came a few points shy of Le Pen. Too many of the fucking, see, France has its shit libs too. What they call the liberals du merde over there. That's what they came out from Macron enough to get rid of Mélenchon. But it's going to come down to how much of that Mélenchon vote goes to Macron and how much of it defects to Le Pen. Just like there was the real, concern in 2016. Are some of these Bernie people going to vote for Trump? 12% of them did. Le Pen is going to need to do a little bit better than that. She's going to have to eat into that support a little bit more to win. But, given those numbers that you just rattled off, it's possible.
Presumably she'll pick up like 100% of Zemmour's voters.
Well, that's what I mean. She'll get his.
From what I understand, Pécresse is actually telling people to vote for Macron in the general. The center right.
Yeah. That she's like the Mitt Romney of 2016.
Exactly.
Never Le Pen. It's all these parallels are there. If you look down here, though, I mean, it is interesting. Look at, is Paris in? So half of Paris actually went for Mélenchon. That's good. That is surprising. But it's what you would expect. A lot of the rural areas are going for Le Pen. Now, the advantage that Macron has that the Remains had in Brexit, of course it didn't do them any good, is that there is no electoral college in France, and so it's a straight majority vote win. You can't lose the popular vote by 2 points in France and win. And so that does give the establishment candidates a bit of an edge that, obviously they don't have here, because that rural vote isn't given the same weight in France as it is here in the U.S. And
from what I can see in Europe, the only thing the only thing that saves these deeply unpopular neoliberal politicians from being eaten alive by the far right is the Nazis. Nobody wants to feel that they put a far right party in power because of the history.
Right, because of the memories there.
Vichy France, like they're still living that down. They don't want to admit they kind of liked the outfits. Bill Blass designed them. They were very elegant. They were very stylish. French went right along with the Führer, so they're still living that down. This is why obviously you're never going to see the Germans elect a far right party.
Right. Well, yeah,
You
exactly.
could pass a law that every German family must host refugees from North Africa, and they're not voting for a far right party. They'll never do it.
Well, the
Um,
other interesting thing about this French race is that it's the first major election that we are seeing since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and to see how people respond to that. Initially, the sort of conventional wisdom is that the Russia-Ukraine war would favor Macron, just because people tend to rally around their leaders in a time of war, but that reasoning has started to change in recent weeks because number one, Macron really has not campaigned at all in this race. He's been trying to broker a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, which that's an interesting point that I want to come back to. But it's also, this also asks the question how the people are going to respond to this conflict. Because, look, I mean, we have felt the effects of the Russia-Ukraine war here in terms of gas prices, utility prices, things like that. It's a whole different ballgame in Europe, which gets 40% of its natural gas from Russia. And so, this is really existential. To the French people, to the German people, right? And so, that is going to factor heavily into the outcome. And I think Macron was to his credit, very smart to try and broker a ceasefire. And if you remember a couple of weeks back, there was a story that he actually had some critical words for Joe Biden because he didn't think Joe Biden was doing enough to try and stop the violence in Ukraine. He's basically on the page that we need to arm Ukraine,
mhm.
which, I mean, for all the people who want to arm Ukraine, I've said this a million times, just so you understand, to advocate for arming Ukraine is really not a pro-Ukraine position as much as it is a pro-war position. The more weapons you dump into Ukraine, the more Ukrainians are going to get slaughtered. Okay, there you go. Anyway, separate point. Point is, Macron, wishes that Joe Biden and the U.S. Would do more to try and stop the violence, and I think that could be very telling, based on some of these results, because I think he knows that his people want to see this stop. They want stability. They want peace. They don't want to have to go to bed every night wondering, as you put it, Russell, if, Ivan is going to, crank the crank the pipe and stop the gas, and, a nationalist leader like Le Pen might be more appealing to people, depending on, how this goes.
Yeah, well, she's moderating her tone.
Well,
She's
she's
saying
moderating her
that she
tone on the
will
Ukrainian immigrants.
on the
She's
Ukrainian
now
immigrants.
right
Yes.
now she wants to admit Ukrainian refugees,
Well, I
which
mean
they'll always give
that's
you a
in
pass on that.
keeping with the white.
Right, it's the white. Yeah, right.
That's
They'll always give you a pass on that. All the right wingers want to take Ukrainian refugees now.
I must say, because as a as a tour guide, I've been working a lot, so there's a lot going on downtown. I'm in Harlem, so up here nobody's walking around with a yellow and blue ribbon. But you go downtown, and there's a lot going on with everyone, showing their support for Ukraine. And okay, God bless them, but yeah, anyone who listens to this show knows that we on this show are regard claims of you know, uh, we don't jump to the conclusion that things are racially based as a first resort. But hey, come on, man. Like
Well, of course, it's the most
the
obvious thing in the world.
Yemenis have been getting slaughtered for fucking years. I've never seen these people walking around with the colors of the Yemen flag and having demonstrations for Yemen or any of the other hot spots around the world where people are being slaughtered horribly. There are always a few at any given time. But Yemen is a particularly egregious example. And okay, this is what I will say with these kind of liberals. I do think there is some unconscious bias towards seeing, white people being bombed out like that as opposed to brown people. I think they're desensitized to that with brown people. I would say more of it though is the media. I think if the media treated Yemen the way they treated Ukraine, I think most people would go along. They just don't. They hardly reported it. They hardly mentioned it.
So, Edward, let me ask you something. What do you think about the French results? And you're closer to the situation than we are, obviously.
Yeah, France is actually very it's like it's if you think the president has a lot of power now in America, like in France, the president is nearly like an elected monarch for about 5 years. It's actually like their parliament has no power. That person just has a serious amount of they can do whatever they want. Like, but I think what's it? Your man on the left, Mélenchon, or what was his name?
Yeah, Mélenchon. Yeah.
He's come out and said he doesn't care who people vote for, but just don't vote for Marine Le Pen. Like she's, I know people. Does she has a lot of distrust. Like people over in Ireland anyway, we'd be very wary of seeing someone like that come into power because France is a major player in the EU, like, and if she's anti-EU, like, so I don't know. It's hard to see her winning, like, because he hasn't even started campaigning, and if he does start campaigning,
yeah, but it's only he's only got 2 weeks. I mean, that's the thing about this timeline. It's not like, the primaries here in the U.S. end about 4 months before the general. Like, he's got 2 weeks now, and I think a lot of it is going to come down to, those Mélenchon voters. Do they back Macron, or do some of them sit out, or do some of them default to Le Pen? And that's going to really be a test of what we call, I guess, the horseshoe theory about, populist left and populist right commonalities. Is there going to be a significant Mélenchon to Le Pen vote, or are the Mélenchon people the sort of Bernie bros of France, the Frères du Mélenchon? Are they going to fuck it up for Macron and get yelled at for the next 5 years? I mean, I think that's how I see it breaking down, because as it stands right now, I mean, just in terms of raw vote, that seems like a very, very underwhelming performance for Macron to only be at 27% as an incumbent in the first round. Seems very, very low. And then you have this, left kind of wild card candidate who was only polling, as I understand it, about 13-14% a month ago. I mean, he really he really came on strong at the end there. Unfortunately, didn't quite make it second. I would have loved to see him go up against Macron. I think he could have smoked Macron, because he would have united a lot of the populace behind him. I mean, it'd be interesting to see who, like, what if the actual right wing had no representation in the final round? Are they going to vote for a fucking, New World Order puppet like Macron, or are they going to go with I think they'd go with Mélenchon. I think he would win in a landslide.
Yeah, I
head
think
to head.
he would too.
Yeah, and it's a shame because he came on really strong and fell just short, which really sucks. I mean, Mélenchon talked about giving clemency to Julian Assange. I mean, he's a good guy, solid guy. And, it wasn't meant to be. So now, same thing. This is why we said there's such parallels between 2016, both in terms of Brexit and our race here, because you had an opportunity where the good candidate, the good, solid populist left candidate came so close to getting to that final round. And if they got there, look at what could be, look at what good could come of that. But they just can't fucking break through. And now you're going to have potentially, France going into the hands of the far right. I mean, I don't know French politics enough to make a prediction, but it looks exactly like Brexit looks, which is like, yeah, I guess technically Macron's a favorite, but it doesn't feel like Macron's a favorite. It's got that feeling in the air that something big is going to happen.
We could definitely see that kind of shock upset. The only factor I feel militates against it is the hesitancy, particularly of those countries that were Nazi countries. I mean, essentially, France was a Nazi country. They collaborated. They were invaded, yes, but then they collaborated. A lot of French society kind of dug the Führer's vision. I think that works against it. I think there's that reticence about doing anything that evokes that past. That might save Macron. If it weren't for that, I would be predicting a Le Pen victory. That's the only thing that makes me say, yeah, Macron's probably got it. He'll probably squeak it out. I say that only on that basis.